Indigenous Datathon here on Meanjin at the Queensland University of Technology campus, The Cube. So we're going to have a wonderful day and a half with everyone. We have esteemed elder Uncle Steve Coghill Senior with us today, so that we pay our respects to Turrbal and Yagara people of this country. So I'm inviting Uncle Steve up as the elder, to a Yagara elder, to welcome us to his country, if he wants to, and to explain this country to us. Thank you, Steve.
No worries. Thanks, Arnie. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry you had to wait a little bit. Navigating around the uni is a challenge in itself. I like to use Google Maps. So I'm going to stick to the script here so it doesn't take up much time. Good morning, everyone. Let me acknowledge the University of Melbourne Indigenous Study Unit and the QUT for hosting and organising this event, the Indigenous Datathon. I'd like to take the opportunity to congratulate these organisations for observing Aboriginal conventions with the welcome to country and the business of the day. Good on you, University of Melbourne. I'm very pleased to provide this welcome this morning, today on behalf of the Aboriginal people of this region, of whom I belong, the Yagara people. The area that I belong to includes the CBD, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. North Stradbroke Island, we call it Chingari, people call it Minjerribah. Wynnum, Inala, of course, my beloved Inala, and Ipswich. So that's the country that I grew up and belong in and have stories for and everything like that. So yeah, so our country extends from South Pine River to the north, Logan River to the south, Stradbroke to the east, and the ranges, Great Dividing Ranges to the west. So my connection to this country is through my great-grandfather, who was born not far from here. He was actually just born down the road here, between the GPO and the Customs House. And that was a birthing place back then for women, obviously. One of the many birthing places around the area. So yes, he was born there. Our ancestors gave us a connection to this country, a bloodline connection to this country, a traditional connection to this country, and also a responsibility for this country. As a Yagara elder and Indigenous community person, I can appreciate the challenges we've endured in securing improved lifestyles over the years. We are supporters, our Yagara people and corporation are supporters of proper political leadership for First Nations people in this country. We advocate for sustainable economic options for our people, and we promote acceptance for our cultural and social standards. We believe that good faith is a foundation of unity, righteousness and goodwill bring us all together so that no one's left out and no one's left behind. So a wise man once said, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to anyone. So I'm not saying there's any sinners here this morning, so don't put your hands up. All I'm saying is that when righteous people with righteous causes happen, it happens for the whole community as well. So as stewards promoting and advocating for change that brings trust and responsibility, we're continually seeking opportunities that make our suburbs, our country, our nation a better place for our children to grow up in. We look forward to a future that's inclusive of all peoples and that accommodates all people's circumstances, cultures in a meaningful and professional manner, and a socially acceptable manner as well. To all people here today, I extend a warm welcome to Yagara country and hope that your presence here is a peaceful and prosperous experience. I'll just say some words now in Yagara. Yawa Yungun, Karumba Birinagambli, Balkana Yagara Jarana, Karumba Naguru Nagambli, Balka Nagambli, Yagara Jarana. And that says, hello friends, that's a friendly greeting, good day to you all. Greetings from our Yagara country. Great Spirit, God bless you all. Greetings all to our Yagara country. Let you stay here, be safe and happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So it's really a pleasure to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Yeah.
I've met you once before.
Yes, yes.
On Stratty.
That's right, on Australia.
Many
Years ago, yeah. So please feel free to stay. Shea's going to give a keynote speech after we do the introductions.
Right.
Well, you might like to hear that.
I've got to get going.
Okay, well thank you very much.
Thank you, good
very
to meet
grateful.
you. Good to meet
Very
you.
grateful.
Cheers all.
Yeah. Stephen's acknowledging the other Stephen. Thank you. So Meanjin, there's a lot to learn about Meanjin with this beautiful river, and we have a terrific view, and we can even see a bit of the river from the window. Okay, so I want to acknowledge our sponsors for this event. I mean, obviously the Queensland University of Technology has put an enormous investment and support into this event, so I acknowledge the Queensland University of Technology, and we have staff from QUT here today, including Becky Cook, Research Officer, who I'll invite up in a minute to give a housekeeping explanation. But we want to acknowledge the Australian Research Data Commons, which funds our work as the Indigenous Data Network, particularly our project Improving Indigenous Research Capabilities. And the Australian Research Data Commons is enabled by the Australian Government's National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy. So other event industry partners include the Australian and New Zealand Intensive Care Society, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, the Queensland University of Technology Centre for Data Science, and the Australian and New Zealand Dialysis and Transplant Registry, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Community Health Service, Brisbane. So many thanks to all of them. So before I go into the purpose of the Datathon, I'll invite Becky Cook, Research Assistant QUT, to come up to tell us about housekeeping and other matters. Can everybody hear?
Yes.
Here.
Okay. Thank you, Marcia. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our campus today and for this event. As Marcia mentioned, I'm just doing some quick housekeeping announcements. Should there be an emergency this morning, you will first hear a siren, which will tell you either to wait for further announcements or to evacuate. If we are asked to evacuate, you can follow outside these doors with the green lights. By the elevator, next to the elevator, there will be a fire escape, or you can go straight out the left and down the stairs. The meeting point is out on the lawn near Old Government House. The other key things you may like to know is the bathrooms, should you need them, are around the back here, and you can go out this door. I think this one's locked if you come back in. And also there is a water station just to the right of the door as you're heading out as well. Thank you.
And while we're doing housekeeping, is Sandy here? She's gone out. Is Athena here? Athena, stand up and say hello to everyone. Athena will be here along with Sandy. So if you need any help, directions, any help at all, ask Athena or Sandy over there for help. So they're your go-to people if you need a hand with anything. And don't be afraid to ask, whatever it is. We even found the chemist ourselves yesterday. So the purpose of our datathon. We aim to explore Indigenous data governance within healthcare research contexts and emphasise cultural sensitivity and data use, including ethical responsibility and when analysing Indigenous healthcare data. So apparently we have some awesome data sets to look at and lots of really smart people to help us with that. So we have you understand of course that this is a competition. It's not like the Hunger Games, relax. And there are no fabulous prizes. I think there's a small prize for the winner, but we're all winners. So we have an Indigenous Datathon judging rubric, and Dr. Rebecca Ritte is going to explain it to us. And I'll just introduce Rebecca. This is the wrong PowerPoint. Where is the Rebecca's introduction? This is the wrong PowerPoint. There it is. It's way down the end for some reason. Okay, sorry. Dr. Rebecca Ritte, Research Fellow, Indigenous Studies Unit, ANEMDA. That's ANEMDA, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health and Wellbeing, University of Melbourne. She's an experienced epidemiologist with a specialised focus on administrative and registry data linkage. She has led the analysis of large-scale data sets drawn from hospitals, registries and population-based surveys. So that was just in the wrong place. Apologies for that. And here we have the rubric itself. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Marcia.
So I'm going to go there behind you.
No
We'll
worries.
get out of the way. Thanks.
No worries. So as you can see, the challenge of such a wide breadth of people coming to have a look at some data that's renal and intensive care unit data, we had to give some sort of structure behind how we're going to judge that and who's going to come first. So these are general guidelines that we're going to do as a judging for the datathon, and the main one that will be weighted, of course, is how it is actually aligned to the ethics and governance of the Indigenous data stewardship. Of course, we want to look at using the fair and care principles. So the reproductive, that was a data set that I was working on just recently. So the reproduction of your results, or whether it fits the datathon aims and brief that we've described today. So we really would also look at the relevant impact that your ideas and the presentations that you have on the renal data and also the intensive care unit, depending on what you have decided to do in your groups. And we'll also be assessing the methods and technical rigour that you've actually applied to it. And that depends, of course, on what type of perspective that you've actually put onto the data sets, whether it's more storytelling or whether you're doing an analytic sort of analysis of the data set. We've got judges and also mentors that have a wide variety of expertise, so depending on where you want to go, there'll be someone there to help you with that. And of course, what we're really looking for is, not really, but also originality and feasibility of what you're actually thinking of doing with the data, and whether you would like to actually chase it in the future through the governance processes to access the data again. And if, of course, there's a standout presentation, we'll always be skewed across the standout one based on the judges' opinions. So if you've got any questions, ask the mentors, but also myself, but also anyone here. We're looking forward to what you actually produce and the creativity that you bring to the data set. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. So there are some points to be made about Indigenous data governance, which is why we're all here, and it's what the Indigenous Data Network focuses on, responsible Indigenous governance of data, especially data that is produced, you might say, without the explicit permission of Indigenous people, and that's the vast majority of data. So we are here to ensure that data respects Indigenous interests. We want to emphasise the Indigenous control to whatever extent is possible, and we can keep extending out those possibilities, especially in relation to ethical principles, and also context and collective benefit. The impact in the healthcare sector is tremendously important to us because, of course, we formed before the Closing the Gap partnership, but once the Closing the Gap partnership with all Australian governments and the Coalition of Peaks was settled, we adopted priority for in relation to sharing of data, especially regional data, to enable Indigenous entities such as health clinics and support organisations to see the data and use the data and analyse the data that affects the people that they serve in order to determine their own priorities rather than having their priorities determined by external forces. So data influences clinical decisions and policies, and misuse can harm Indigenous communities with negative stereotypes. So let's solve that problem by thinking about it ethically and in relation to the fair and care principles, and we'll come to that. Relational accountability, which means simply that researchers must acknowledge responsibility to Indigenous communities, ensuring ethical data practices. So we need to think deeply about how we work in order to do that. Of course, these principles are based on articles in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP as it's called, which is a United Nations international standard, and it's a document ratified by many governments. It took a long time for Australia, the United States, Canada, and I think New Zealand to sign up to it, but they ratified it belatedly. So it is now the international standard of Indigenous human rights, and Article 31 concerns the rights to Indigenous autonomy in relation to internal and local affairs and in relation to cultural, human and genetic resources. So our responsibilities as researchers involves understanding the meaning of self-determination, the rights articulated in the Declaration, and how these rights can be recognised in research, recognising and differentiating between individual, group and or collective rights, responsibilities and ownership, and undertaking research only if it does not conflict with individual rights, freedoms and dignity. So this is why we're here at the Indigenous Datathon. So the Datathon participants will be using linked or separated intensive care and renal health datasets. Participants can generate insights that improve healthcare outcomes for all populations, especially Indigenous people. We'll learn how to ensure data is handled respecting Indigenous data governance, cultural protocols and ethical standards, and also how data represents lives and communities. Participants are encouraged to analyse with respect and accountability. So I'm sure you all know about the FAIR principles. So a quick overview is findable data. Data should be easily located and well described with clear structured metadata for efficient discovery. Accessible data. Data must be available under clear, transparent conditions to ensure straightforward access by users. Interoperable data. Data should be compatible with other data sets and systems, enabling seamless integration and use. Reusable data. Data must be well documented and licensed for future use, supporting ongoing research and analysis. So here are the care principles which speak to Indigenous-centred governance. So one is collective benefit. Data should be support the well-being and development of Indigenous communities collectively, or should say really, Indigenous populations in communities or wherever they live collectively, as collectives. Authority to control. Indigenous people have the right to govern how their data is accessed and used. And that's a big challenge. Let's think about that. How can we achieve that? Responsibility of researchers. Researchers must act with cultural integrity, transparency, and accountability in data use. Maybe we make declarations about how we are doing that, for instance. That's one idea. Ethical data use. Data use must align with Indigenous values, protocols, and priorities, ensuring respect and justice. So, applying these principles in the Datathon. Contextualise Indigenous data. Treat Indigenous data as a story, emphasising context and cultural significance beyond raw variables. Avoid deficit framing. Use language that highlights strengths and resilience, steering clear of negative or deficit perspectives. I'm sure many of you are aware, for instance, that amongst Indigenous people in Australia, we cringe when the Closing the Gap report is about to be tabled in Parliament because, you know, the Prime Minister announces inevitably how many targets have not been met. And it's always couched in negative terms. Nobody talks about how we are meeting targets locally or regionally, or even exceeding targets. So, you know, it's a tragedy that the Closing the Gap strategy excludes, in the presentation of the data, the successes that we've made locally, and I'm sure many of you can, you know, point to successes, local successes, where we've exceeded the targets. Oh, well, one, for instance, is, you know, and I like to say this one out loud, is that we long ago exceeded the parity in the enrolment of Indigenous students in first year medicine. Isn't that nice? Yep. I'm sure all of you can think of other successes that we've had, but these are never pointed out in the Closing the Gap reports. Respect data provenance. Understand and honour the origins and ethical standards tied to the data being analysed. Support community benefits. Ensure insights generated can facilitate community-led actions and meaningful outcomes. So, for instance, we design our projects, our research projects, with our community partners, and we take our findings back to them regularly and allow them to participate. Well, of course, it's beyond allow, it's, you know, they participate in the interpretation of that data and how that data can be used and published. So here at the Datathon we have mentors, and as I read out the names, you could put your names up, your hands up, put your hands up so people can see who you are. And they will be sitting at your tables with you and available throughout the Datathon to assist you. That should read Kristen Smith, yep, down the front there, Rebecca Ritte, Fanny Francini up the back there, Paul Seckham, yep, there's Paul over there, Shayla Shaban, I hope I've said that right, yep, there's Shayla. David Pilcher's not here yet, he'll be here tomorrow morning, I believe. Chris Davies, there's Chris, hi Chris. Dana Forsey, hi Dana. Becky Cook, again, thank you. Bernadette Highland Wood, up the back there. Gavin Stanbrook, there you are, yep, hi.
The rest are just volunteers.
Hey?
The rest of the list is just volunteers.
And the rest of the list are the volunteers. So you've said hello to Sandy before. Kit Greenhill, there's Kit way up the back there. Aaron Lee on the camera. Afina Gray there. Casey Hasselhoff in the yellow shirt, and Ashley Stewart. Ashley, hi Ashley, and I'm putting my hand up too. I can be a volunteer. So David will be here tomorrow as one of the he'll be one of two judges. Professor David Pilcher is an intensive care specialist at the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne and chairman of the Australian and New Zealand Intensive Care Society, Centre for Outcome and Resource Evaluation. He's an adjunct clinical professor with Monash University and the honorary secretary of ANZICS. And then there's myself as one of the judges, and I'll be working with David from tomorrow and working with the matrix. So if you have any questions about the matrix, talk to Rebecca. So I'm a professor at the University of Melbourne. I'm the director of the Indigenous Studies Unit in ANEMDA, Aboriginal Health and Wellbeing, in the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health. And we work on data governance. You've met Rebecca, who explained the judging matrix. And final reflections. So I want to encourage open-mindedness and willingness to learn when analysing data during the datathon. Perhaps when you analyse your data, going to point number 1, you'll find the story. Data should tell a story. And data has a legacy. What's the origin of the data? What's its history? And let's centre Indigenous voices and perspectives and governance principles in data work. So that's the introduction, and I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Shea Spierings. Dr. Shea Spierings is a Gungaloo man and the inaugural director of the Knowledge and Research Centre for the Institute for Urban Indigenous Health Network in southeast Queensland. And this is Australia's first Aboriginal community-controlled research centre. He leads a network-wide program of research monitoring and evaluation on behalf of Australia's largest consortium of Aboriginal medical services. We call it the IHUI network, and as I explained, that's the Institute for Urban Indigenous Health. Dr. Spierings is also an experienced company director with 3 current appointments, chair of Country to Coast, Queensland, responsible for ensuring primary healthcare access for 900,000 people across central Queensland, Wide Bay and the Sunshine Coast. He is also a board member of Australia's largest hospital service, Metro North Hospital and Health Service, which has an annual budget of $4.2 billion and employs over 25,000 staff and services, approximately 1 million people. He has previously worked across a variety of sectors, including academia, foreign policy, construction and security. And of course he has many qualifications, Bachelor of Arts Honours, Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Queensland, and he is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. So I'd like to hand up, is that correct? All of that's correct, because I just checked earlier on. Thank you. Dr. Shea Spierings, we look forward to hearing from you. No.
No. One of these ones.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
I'll turn this off then.
Well, you can hold on to it too in case you got to. See if that works.
Yep, that
Set
works.
mindful,
You can put the...
It's your voice is being recorded through this mic in our camera as well.
Okay.
So if you want to walk around, maybe have that with you as well.
Try and
That's
keep
for
that
the
on.
video.
Yeah.
So you want to put this one on as well?
Yeah, something like that.
Whatever works for you.
Does that work?
Yeah, that should work.
Great.
What's the sound like? Is it too loud?
It's good.
Okay. So, yeah, good morning everyone. You sure that's not too loud? Sounds very loud to me. Okay. Anyway, I can turn it down if we need to. So good morning everyone, my name's Shea. My mind's been racing. I don't have a background necessarily in data, I just have an interest. And certainly through the centre that I'm now the director of, we actually oversee a series of data linkage projects. in partnership with some of the hospital services and our Aboriginal medical services here in South East Queensland. So there's a lot of things that come to mind. And I don't know if there's any key messages, and I'll probably raise more questions than provide answers, but I think that's okay. I like doing that because I think from our perspective here in South East Queensland, which is why I'm speaking to you, we don't really know what data sovereignty means to us. We haven't figured that out. We're still figuring that out, and we're asking lots of questions of ourselves, our community and our partners. So in saying that, I'm probably going to talk to you about some of the problems that we face and the challenges, that we see, and they're very particular ones. And while everyone's been talking, including, Uncle Steve, Marcia, I've just been thinking about the dangers of data, because data can be used in, we talked about deficit, but data can be used in really particular ways to actually create very particular problems and also make people look like the problem when they're not. And I was thinking about a presentation I gave in relation to rates of incarceration for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and rates in crime rates, and how crime rates have dropped, but rates of incarceration have increased. And it was interesting because I wasn't expecting the question. These were undergrad students, and one person said, but are the crime rates going down because people are going to prison? And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Isn't that a really interesting way that you could misinterpret this, or someone could put this data forward and use it in a very particular way to tell a story which actually isn't true? When people are being done for breaches of parole, not being granted bail, sitting in remand for crimes that they didn't necessarily commit, and then sitting in remand for longer than they actually would have been if they'd even been sentenced in the first place. So I explained that too, but I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And then I think about some of our hospital services here in South East Queensland. So we actually have a unique agreement called the South East Queensland Health Equity Agreement. All of the hospital services here in Queensland have to deliver a health equity strategy for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But in South East Queensland, we've brought all of our hospital and health services, primary health networks and Aboriginal medical services together, and we meet once a year. We're actually meeting in the Convention Centre next week to talk about the challenges that we face. And I think, for example, about what used to be called in hospital data sets as failure to attend, right? And so you'd see rates, for example, of failure to attend for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people accessing outpatients, post-surgeries being really high. And everyone would go, oh, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people really don't like coming back, do they? Well, he said, well, what have you actually done? How did you reach out? What was your method of communication? You dig a little bit deeper and then you realise, okay, you're putting the onus back on the responsibility on the individual when it's actually your fault. It's the system's fault. You've failed. So really, what we call it now, in series of hospital health services here, is a failure to deliver service. So that rather than going, oh, those people just don't want to be serviced or looked after, the service now has to look at itself in the mirror and go, okay, what are we doing? How are we failing? So data can be used in really inappropriate ways, and it can be weaponised. And I think it's just something to be really cautious of. It's not something that, everyone talks about it all the time anyway, but from an Aboriginal medical service perspective. So, as the Director of the Knowledge and Research Centre, I sit across our IUE network. I'll show a slide soon. And that means that we have member services. There's IUE, there's Brisbane and ATSIX, which we heard mentioned. There's Yuliburrabah, there's Calwin, there's MATSIX. We're the largest consortium of Aboriginal medical services in the country. We represent South East Queensland. My role is to, on behalf of that series of network members, report to the CEOs and navigate and negotiate our partnerships and our research profile. Because we do research as autonomous Aboriginal medical services, but we tell each other about it, and the partnerships are managed through me on behalf of the network to make sure that what might be right for one medical service might not be of interest to anyone else, but we still manage that together. Because we know that people like to come in and gently sort of push us apart, and they'll go to one group and not tell anyone else and say, oh, I want you to be involved in this. We just need access to your 715 data, which is extremely valuable. And it can be taken and used inappropriately, so we're a little bit cautious about that sometimes. It can be taken and produced really good positive outcomes for us too, which is really critical. So before I keep going too far, I should probably actually get onto the presentation. So just a bit about me too. As you heard, my people are Gungaloo. This is Blackdown. These are my photos, by the way. So this is Blackdown. And I was just thinking about it the other day too, because we talk a lot, I talk very metaphorically, and half of the conversations that I have around some of these things are probably up here, and the other half are out there. But so this is Blackdown back up in central Queensland. I'm from Rockhampton, for those of you who may or may not be from around here. So I was born and raised up there. And on my father's side, we're Gungaloo. On my grandmother's side too, we're also Garang. So that means I'm tied to, that means my bloodlines come all the way down here, including the Sandys and the Masons down here, who Uncle Stephen grew up with. But then my people go all up the coast, back up into central Queensland. And I was having a conversation with someone too around, we're talking about, everyone knows this, or everyone hears about this in various different ways, about, bushfires come through, seeds germinate, everything regrows, but you can't have a too hot a bushfire and all this sort of stuff. But a lot of people forget that it's actually smoke that germinates certain types of seeds. So a lot of acacias or wattles, they're germinated through smoke, not the fire. There are certain seeds that require a bit of fire and a bit of heat and a bit of warmth, but not all of them. And then you go home and look back at the country, and I was thinking, it's interesting because when you go up in Blackdown Tablelands, which is a really important place for us because we have our Gungaloo Reserve too up there, which has a lot of our sacred sites. We get to go and do nice things up there. But that place wouldn't sustain very well with a bushfire. But you go down to the lowlands, it's very dry, it gets very hot. It gets hot up there too, but it's different. It's green and it can be a bit wet. But the difference is it still needs smoke. So we're talking about doing cultural burnings back up there. And the difference between just sort of lighting a fire and doing a cultural burn is a slow process, and you actually also need to observe what goes on around you. So you might light a really small fire, and when you start seeing the insects react, because you'll see things come out of the ground, and you'll see things in the trees take off, you know that the place is starting to recognise it, because you don't want to kill everything too, right? It's pretty basic. But I was thinking about this and this place being special and what all this means and how we mediate our relationships with other people too. And I was thinking about, so Mick Gooder's Gungaloo, and Mick Gooder walks around with a little badge. He's got a little badge sometimes on his lapel. You might see it if you ever see him. And it's got a little scrub turkey on there because that's one of our countrymen. And so that's really important. We think about how we mediate these relationships, right? And I was thinking about the ethics of understanding how it is we engage with ourselves, our people, all these other things and everything else around us. And how that defines how it is we actually do business in relation to our community-controlled healthcare sector. It's pretty critical. It's all related. It might seem a little bit philosophical, but it actually drives what we talk about when it comes to the Data and Research Governance Committee that I present to next week on Thursday to talk about all the different research projects that we're involved in, because we've got to come back to those core principles at all times. So, just bringing you back, any Broncos fans? Anyone watch the grand final? Yeah, Broncos fans? Yeah, cool. Ezra Mam? Yeah, everyone knows Ezra Mam. So his grandmother, Auntie Pam, was the founder of Aboriginal Medical Service up in Red Hill, which later became Brisbane ATSIX. And this is a quote from Auntie Pam, our collectivity is our strength. So just to give you a sense of what the network actually is, and so I sit nowhere and everywhere. We're a series of medical services. We also have the Auntie Pam Health Centre, again, so that's Ezra's grandmother, named after Ezra's grandmother. And our services are very comprehensive, everything from sort of GP primary healthcare through to specialists. So we employ, ophthalmologists and everyone else, and we partner with a series of very important, I say important as important to us, other specialists who deliver services out of our partners in the hospital healthcare sector. And those things are really important because I think about some of the conversations we have to have that are ongoing, for example, around surgical streams. So if I look at the data, some of our surgical streams say that they've got, 0% wait list Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and you go, that's great. But how do you drive down the wait list? Are you actually delivering the surgery, or are people being removed from the list because they're not answering the phone when you call them and tell them to come in? Right? Sounds really stupid. But I guarantee you people don't always ask these questions, right? And that means that you can end up with really sick and unwell people in the community. So healthcare data, sometimes you make these assumptions around the story that it tells and gets presented in a very particular way, but those assumptions we make can be dangerous. And our responsibility, if I go back to the previous photos of Blackdown, all that sort of stuff, are back to the places that give us the authority to make these decisions in the first place, right? And allow us to actually mediate our relationships to other people. Because this network sits in South East Queensland. My role is South East Queensland. I don't look outside of South East Queensland. I can work with people outside of South East Queensland, but this is my remit. This is the place that I represent, and these are also the medical services that I go to. This is where I go and have my 715, and I go and see my GP. And I also go and vote at the AGM, because that's how community control works, right? Some of the people might see that as being a bit conflicted, but local government's the same. You vote for the mayor, could be your neighbour, doesn't matter. It's actually about accountability and transparency and having authority. So that's what we talk about when we're talking about community control. I'm also happy to take questions. It might not be appropriate, I don't know, but if anyone ever wanted to whack their hand up and just say, oh, while you're on it, that's fine with me. Now, just talking about, without going into the deep and the nitty gritty, you guys got your data sets, you got your rubrics, you got other things you're going to talk about too, so I'm not going to talk about any of that sort of stuff. I'm just going to reflect on some of the conversations that we continue having at a relatively high level, because our medical services, we have 21 different clinics, we oversee primary healthcare delivery to 40,000 people here in South East Queensland. South East Queensland has the second largest Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population in the entire country, right? Second only to Western Sydney. We probably will have the largest by 2031. That's what the projections tell us. So when we're talking about the ethical considerations we have in relation to data, or also the services we deliver, people, and I find this a little bit problematic sometimes, go, oh, you know, sort of these are the ethical standards or the ethical guidelines. And I go, yeah, they're guidelines, you know? And people always go, yeah, but it's a guideline. I say, yeah, it's a guideline. It guides your decision making. It doesn't define it. You can take other things into account. That's really critical. And the one thing that we forget is that just Western ethics, as it's evolved from an intellectual standpoint, has never been static. It's dynamic. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, from our perspective, don't need to be held to account, you know, when it talks about talking about doing things a bit differently, because people go, oh no, that doesn't work. That's, you know, it doesn't fit in with the guidelines. And we go, yeah, things have always changed. We're happy with that. You should be too. That's how you got here. So I think it's just something really important to remember. When we talk about the origin of our ethics, we talk about our relationship to country. I already talked about that a little bit. And it's pretty critical because Auntie Mary Graham, one of our elders and residents across the IUE network, sits on our Data and Research Governance Committee, always reminds us that from an ethical standpoint too, you know, not just to each other, but our relationship to each other, everything that we have and all our accountability and the transparency we have to be accountable for has to come from our relationship to a place, right? So if we're going to be talking about Indigenous data sovereignty, or if we're going to be talking about, you know, data sets that might be relevant to our people, even though they're delivered in a hospital health service here that's delivered on, you know, our patch, it's really about, you know, are we understanding that transparency and accountability comes from sharing this place, right? Because I think from an Aboriginal standpoint, and I'm not saying this is universal, but these are the conversations we have here in South East Queensland, it's about what is your obligation to this place that's given you life, given you everything that you've got, given everything that you do, and how do you deliver upon that? And from an Indigenous data standpoint, it gets really interesting because sometimes hospitals might go, oh, this sits within the realm of our hospital, and you go, yeah, but your hospital sits here. And our people access your hospital, so you don't necessarily have the right to take any of that data from our people who live, and we're responsible to, and access our community control. So we do all this stuff, but we ask all those other questions first. And we continue to ask ourselves, because as I said before, those ethical considerations, they don't stop. It doesn't matter if there's an updated version of, you know, NHMRC guidelines or not. We continue to ask questions, because I think to the point that Marcia was making before as well, what matters to us in South East Queensland might not necessarily align to what the rest of the country wants to do and how they want to do it. So we have to make sure that we're accountable to our communities, because they're the ones who actually established our service. And if I go back to Auntie Pam Mam talking about collectivity as our strength, establishing the first Aboriginal medical service up in Red Hill, for those of you who know Brisbane, along with Uncle Les Collins, who grew up with Uncle Stephen, they set up that medical service, and within a couple of weeks that place got firebombed and burnt down because people didn't want Aboriginal people to have access to primary healthcare services of community control. Of course they rebuilt, and now we have the largest network in the country. So it starts somewhere, but you've got to keep going. There, that'll do. So thank you for your time.